So, you've probably heard a line like this before, right? The Egyptians and Sumerians smelted silver and gold. Sounds pretty simple, like a fact you'd skim in a history textbook. But what if I told you that one little sentence is hiding this absolutely incredible story of high-tech chemistry, ancient global economics, and raw power?
Okay, so let's really get into this. Was it that straightforward? I mean, did they just treat both metals the same way? Well, as we're about to find out, the real story is way more complicated, and honestly, it's a whole lot cooler.
First things first, let's set the scene. We're talking about two of the world's earliest, greatest civilizations, ancient Egypt and Sumer, way back around 4000 BCE. And both of these cultures were, completely mesmerized by the beauty of precious metals. And you gotta remember, these weren't just simple farming societies. No way. These places were bustling hubs of innovation. Their skill with metals wasn't just about making pretty things. It was cutting-edge science, the result of serious experimentation in mining, chemistry, and engineering.
So let's start with gold. In a lot of ways, gold was kind of like the low-hanging fruit for ancient metalworkers. It was this amazing gift from nature that was, all things considered, pretty easy to get your hands on and work with.
And the main reason for that was something called alluvial gold. See, a lot of the gold they were using wasn't trapped inside complicated rocks. Instead, it was just sitting there as pure metal flakes and even little nuggets in riverbeds and streams. You literally just had to find it and pick it up. So the whole process was, pretty direct. Step 1, find the gold. Step 2, melt it down to clean it up and get it into a nice workable lump. And Step 3, hammer it into whatever beautiful thing you're making. Simple, right? Well, hold that thought. And what's so fascinating is how gold's basic physical properties completely shaped culture. Because it doesn't rust or tarnish, its brilliant shine just seemed to last forever. So for the Egyptians, that made it the perfect material, the only material, really, for their gods and pharaohs. It was like a little piece of eternity you could hold.
All right, now for the other half of our story, silver. And this is where things get really interesting. If gold was a gift you could just find in a river, silver was a prize that had to be ripped from the earth through fire, smoke, and some serious brainpower.
Here is the absolute key difference. Most of the time, you couldn't just find a nugget of pure silver lying around. It was chemically locked inside other rocks, especially ores that were full of lead. So to get to the silver, you first had to figure out how to break those chemical bonds. And that required a revolutionary piece of technology: smelting. Now, this isn't just melting something. It's a full-on controlled chemical reaction inside a super hot furnace. You're using intense heat and other materials to force the metal to separate from the rock it's trapped in.
But it didn't even stop there. After smelting, you usually had this messy blob of lead and silver all mixed together. To get pure silver, you needed a second, even more delicate process called cupellation. This meant carefully reheating that alloy and blasting it with air, which would turn the lead to ash and, like magic, leave behind a pool of pure, gleaming silver.
So let's just compare for a second. Remember that simple find, melt, shape path for gold? Well, this is the path for silver. It's a massive, multi-stage industrial process. It involves mining, complex chemistry in a furnace, a whole separate refining stage. I mean, the amount of skill and knowledge this required is just mind-blowing. So we have one metal that's relatively easy to get and another that's incredibly difficult. Now, you'd think that would have a major impact on how much they were worth, right? Well, you are absolutely correct, just maybe not in the way you'd expect. Let's just focus on ancient Egypt for a minute. Egypt was famously loaded with gold. Huge deposits right there in their backyard and in neighboring Nubia. But it had almost no local sources of silver. For an Egyptian, silver was this exotic foreign material that you could only get through risky long-distance trade. And here it is, the big twist. Because silver was so hard to find locally and so incredibly difficult to produce, its value just skyrocketed. It's kind of hard for us to wrap our heads around, but there were actually times in ancient Egypt when silver was worth more than gold. And this just pulls back the curtain on an even bigger truth. This kind of metalworking wasn't just some local hobby, it was the engine of a truly global ancient economy. A craftsman in Sumer or Egypt was often working with metals that had traveled thousands of miles across deserts and seas just to get to his workshop. So, let's zoom out for a second. Why does all this really matter? Why should we care about the difference between working gold and silver? What does it actually tell us about the ancient world? Well, first, it shows us that these ancient people were incredible scientists. This wasn't some kind of magic or sorcery. It was a craft that was built on centuries of patient observation, trial, and error. They understood furnaces, fuel, airflow, and chemistry in a deeply real, practical way.
And second, these metals weren't for just anybody. Their rarity and the sheer difficulty of producing them made them the ultimate status symbols. So if you saw a king or a priest decked out in gold and silver, it wasn't just, ancient bling. It was a powerful message that they held the wealth and the global connections to control these rare and amazing materials.
Okay, so let's do a quick recap of everything we figured out. Number 1, gold was usually found, while silver had to be made through a tough extraction process. 2, that huge technical difference directly affected their value. 3, this meant that sometimes, like in Egypt, silver was actually more precious than gold. And finally, all of this proves that ancient metalworkers were not just craftsmen, they were true scientists and innovators.
The story of gold and silver really shows us that history is just packed with these hidden, complex stories. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? What other simple facts that we just take for granted are out there, just waiting to tell us an even more incredible story?